As we talk about rhetoric, something else that was appalling to me was this insinuation that when you look at the Ukrainians, which is why we're having problems getting the funding that Ukraine needs, is because people in this chamber push misinformation and disinformation. They want to talk about the Ukrainians got all of these Nazis. Well, let me tell you something. You can find Nazis anywhere. You can find them right here in the United States. In fact, a bunch of the people that they're calling victims and prisoners of war, also known as convicted felons from January 6th. I have an article that I'd like to enter into the record by unanimous consent that says neo-Nazi January 6th rioter pleads guilty.
Without objection.
Thank you so much. So here's the point. We have people in this chamber that are actually causing just as much a threat, if not more of a threat, to our own country. We should be talking about holding our very own accountable for the misinformation and disinformation that they are spreading, whether it's coming out of China, whether it's coming out of Russia, or whoever is peddling it. It is a problem because right now what we see is that people are dying and we cannot get the support that we need from the public because they continue to peddle lies. And I'm tired of it because I didn't come to this chamber to play games. I came to this chamber to answer to the people, the American people, and to make sure that we keep the American people safe. And if we don't get something done, as they talk about the border, I do want to be clear. The only reason we haven't gotten funding for the border is because they killed, the House Republicans here, killed the bill that they actually sent us from the Senate side. If they want to do some work, let me tell you something. The Democrats are ready, and it seems like the Senate Republicans are ready too. They just need to get to it and stop peddling Putin's lies. Thank you, and I yield.
The sister never misses. That was the voice of one Representative Jasmine Crockett. She is someone who has purposefully made every decision with one goal in mind, protecting the civil liberties of those in underrepresented communities. And as a public defender, civil rights attorney, state representative, and U.S. Congresswoman, Representative Crockett dedicates her life to public service with the goal of serving justice and ensuring equality for all. Oh, and yes, she is also one of my sorors, a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Representative Crockett, it is a pleasure to be here with you. Welcome back to the show.
Good morning.
I couldn't let it go. I couldn't and shall not. You have a well-earned reputation for saying the things and not missing. And in light of the commentary that we just heard, and considering how much it took for Congress to actually push this vote forward on Ukraine aid, talk to us about the sense of what's happening right now in Congress. We've got aid out to Ukraine, the packages looking at Ukraine and Israel. This was something that a lot of folks thought would not happen because of the current Speaker of the House. There was a lack of certainty that he was going to actually even bring this forward to a bill. Or to a vote, rather. Give us a sense as to where things stand now that the Ukrainian vote package in particular has moved forward.
Everything is good on our side. The other side is imploding, but they've been doing that since before we could get to day one. If people will recall, I could not swear in on day one. So, there's a lot of big talk from Marjorie Taylor Greene and some of the other far-right extremists that really were the ones holding it back. I mean, when you looked at the numbers, an overwhelming majority, this wasn't even close. We're not talking about we needed one or two Republicans to cross over. Now, granted, they did not support Ukraine as much as they supported Israel or as much as they supported banning TikTok, for sure. But we still had well over 300 votes in general. So some would look and say, what was the holdup, right? Because it wasn't close, it wasn't tight. And at this point in time, those few far righters that are very upset about the fact that the speaker did what a speaker is supposed to do, they're making threats. But as far as I'm concerned, they're empty. They don't have anywhere to go. They barely found this speaker at the bottom of the pile when they evicted the last one. So they don't have anywhere to go. And right now they have accepted their fate that they're most likely going to lose the House. Now, while they want to blame it on the moderates, or even if we have any moderates left, they want to blame it on the few Republicans that do want to do at least something. The reality is that MAGA is the reason that they are going to lose the House.
Wow. That, I got to be honest with you, gives me a lot of comfort because I'm still tense. I'm very concerned. I just don't have a sense as to where this election is going to go. I feel like the obvious answer is staring us right in front of the face, but we have so many other extenuating circumstances. You mentioned the misinformation and the disinformation campaigns, to be sure. And we've seen a lot of that, but there's also this growing resistance on behalf of young people, young voters in particular. We were just talking about the protests taking place at college campuses. For you and other representatives, many of whom sort of lump you all into sort of the progressive caucus, whether you're actually members of it or not, we sort of see you all in this way. Give us a sense as to some of the complexities that go into the way you are able to cast your vote. We saw one tweet from AOC Representative Alessandria Ocasio-Cortez, who said, if you agree with the way your candidates voted on these packages, you got to tell them, you got to support them for it. How are some of these votes complicating, if they are, your ability and the ability of your colleagues to move forward on a progressive front, at least when it comes to seeking reelection?
Yeah, for me, I'm basically done. My election was Super Tuesday because I am in a safe Democratic seat. So God bless Texas 30. I had the best numbers in the entire state of any challenged incumbent, Democrat or Republican, in Congress.
That's round of applause worthy. Hold on now, Representative. That's definitely round of applause worthy because you are a favorite for those of us outside of Texas. We just never know how these things are going to go in the district.
Correct.
So you're not sweating any bullets for November.
I am not sweating. I think they said that a libertarian signed up against me or something, but it's all good. We'll be fine. I will tell you though, it has been the most complicated thing. Ukraine, I don't think Ukraine wasn't causing an issue for really any Democrats at all. Every single Democratic member voted for the Ukraine funding. The complexities arise when we start talking about the Israel funding. Right. And I think it's because of the conversations around it. I don't want to say approached, but it was more like accosted, but by some folk that were very upset about my vote. My district, who sent me to DC, knows me, trusts me as a civil rights lawyer, and really does trust my judgment. And so most people don't realize we had 3 votes on Israel. The first one was to vote for funding to go to Israel, defund the IRS. That did pass out the House. The Senate didn't touch it. We then had a vote just to send funding to Israel and nothing else. That passed out the House as well, and the Senate didn't touch it. And then finally, this bill was a bill that gave money to Israel for sure, but also included funding for Gaza. And this is where you saw Democrats that had not supported the previous packages move off the sideline. And it is hard to tell people that I'm in the minority as a Democrat. I don't get to set the agenda. I don't get to set the bills, but I can say, you know what? I will vote for this now that there's at least some consideration of the people that are struggling and suffering on the other side. And that's what I decided to do. But then there were those that were like, no, because there also was obviously money for Israel. And it does get really complex when you start talking about what does it look like to have an allyship, and is that allyship to the leader of that country at the moment in a modern day democracy, or is the allyship with the people in the country, and does it survive whoever may be sitting in the seat at the helm at that time? And what type of precedents do we potentially set for, say, if we end up with another Trump administration? Would that then allow our allies to write us off because we have a deranged man that's at the wheel? Or do they say the United States is our friend and our ally, and we have a relationship, and this is bigger than that one person, but it's about the people and it's about the history of the relationship? And so it is very complicated because, as you can see from the top on down, we have leadership that is struggling with the decisions that are being made by the current leadership in Israel, to the extent that Senator Schumer obviously called for an election, because there are those of us that believe that the Israeli people would not put him back into power if an election was held today, and potentially we can move on and find some semblance of peace. But I'll never pretend as if I don't understand the complexities of the Middle East, and the fact that we didn't have rappers rapping about this for decades, talking about peace in the Middle East. So I won't pretend that I really believe that peace is really an option, but I do believe that there is an opportunity to go back to some level of normalcy, but the level of normalcy in the Middle East is not what we would consider normal in the
Right.
United States, for sure.
Right. No, I thank you for breaking that down, because a lot of folks miss the fact that there were multiple votes on this legislation, and letting us know what goes into someone coming off those sidelines and deciding, okay, now I am going to vote this particular package. We're dealing with a real gap in terms of civic education and understanding, and not everyone out there is in the weeds and following this. I consider myself to be somewhat in the weeds, and even I still need to be educated about how the different complexities of each vote. So thank you for breaking that down. I just saw a friend of mine, reporter. She's a phenomenal writer, Jamila Lemieux, and one of the things that she put out on social media was that she feels like the only colleges that would host President Joe Biden, as commencement speaker at a time like this would be an HBCU institution. And she was referencing the protests that we're seeing all across college campuses. And I, as one of those people who was a big college protester. I did a lot of that work when I was in college. I support what these students are doing, this energy in terms of and whether I agree with how each particular university's group of students is addressing it isn't for me the issue. I'm more in support of just collective action generally. There is such an innovation that can come when young people are gathered together, imagining a better world and figuring out how to secure it. And again, whether I agree with how they're going to secure it or not isn't the question, because now I'm considered an old. So technically, my perspective on this is no longer valid. But I'm wondering how these protests land for someone like yourself, who is often seen as sort of a champion and a hero of issues on the left. How are these college protests, how are they impacting the nature of the discourse between you and your colleagues when it comes to going into this election? A lot of folks relying on the youth vote, other folks pushing back saying, well, the youth complain a lot, but they don't really vote anyway. What is this? What is this collegiate campus uprising? How is it impacting the relationship or the conversations about policy that you all are having in the halls of Congress?
Honestly, it's not impacting it enough as far as I'm concerned. I do think, and you've got to recognize that Congress is quite old. So
Right.
on average, and so that second opinion that you laid out of like, oh, the young people, they don't know what they're doing and they don't vote no matter what. I think that really is a sentiment that some garner when you start talking about our caucus. But when you think about the younger members, I'm very concerned, and I think you're seeing some of the concern, and it's almost like people have decided that in this war, you have to double down and pick a side, and if you don't pick a side, then they have a problem with you, and I think that that's part of the problem, right? Because there are those that believe that everything started on October 7th, which ain't true at all. This is a long, deep-seated, complex issue, an issue that literally, when you are going to Congress, there are those that come at you about endorsements. And in my race, I had a total of 9 opponents in my initial primary, and I had 3 opponents that were trying to get Israel money to get into the race and spin against me. And I had opponents that literally told them that I was anti-Semitic. And I said, I'm not anti anybody. I'm a civil rights lawyer. I've never been anti. I have always looked for what was just and right for all people. And I can recognize the history. And so one of the most interesting things about when I was in Israel prior to the war is there was one speaker that came and talked to a group of us. And that speaker did something that I had never had anybody do. They basically broke down that you have 2 groups of people that are struggling with PTSD. And I hadn't thought about it that way, right? Like it ends up being a matter of people on the Israeli side see the suffering of the Jewish people and they say, it's terrible, it's awful, oh my gosh. And anything that adds to that pain or pours salt on the wound, that's all that they can really experience. And then there are those on the Palestinian side that have struggled and gone through these wars, because this ain't the first one that they've experienced as well. And they've gone through the occupations and things like that. And they also are struggling from a PTSD and a suffering. And the only thing that they can see is that somebody's pouring salt on the wound, instead of people recognizing that you have two people that literally, for the most part, don't trust each other. And they're both struggling. And they both have been harmed and hurt over the years, just like we see right now, right? And so it's a matter of, what is the solution? You know, everybody says two-state, two-state, two-state. And once I was there, I was like, there will not be a two-state. And that was right before the war. I was there 2 months before the war. And I was like, oh no, this is not going to happen.
Just
because
based off of your observations of the dynamics and the political
based
engagement?
on my conversations, we literally sat down with the leader of the opposition party, Lapid. We sat down with Netanyahu. We sat down with the Palestinian Authority prime minister as well. We sat down and talked to all these people, and I need the people to know that I am the same when you see the cameras rolling and when they not. And I asked the hard questions. And the craziest part about this is, I remember asking one question in one of those meetings. I said, how is it? And I wasn't trying to tell them that I wasn't supportive, but boy, did people get excited. I said, how is it that I am supposed to go back to my district where 20% live at or below poverty and explain to them that at the same time that my Republican colleagues are trying to cut access to SNAP benefits and food stamps, where they're only getting $6 a day, yet we're sending money over to Israel, their tax dollars. I need you to tell me how I have this conversation with my constituency. And they were like, oh, well, you need to explain, you know, that this is a matter of national security, that we are y'all's closest Democratic ally in the Middle East, this and that. I was like, yeah, I hear you. But when people can't eat, right? Like what, like, part. How is it? So I was, what I was really trying to do was get them to think about the fact that America has to actually do right by America as well, right? Like, so, because in all these conversations, it was like Israel security, Israel security, Israel security, right? And I get that, and I wasn't trying to argue against it, but I also wanted them to recognize that as elected officials in the United States, that some of us have very complicated conversations that we have to have with our constituents. And at that time, because it was before the war, right? I'm like, most people don't vote on foreign policy. That's not how or why they head to the polls, right?
Right.
And I know, you know, the difference in the ledger and that kind of stuff. And basically what I also was trying to get across to them was, what assurances do we have over the fact that this money will be protected? Because a lot of people don't understand that Netanyahu has a lot of Trump-like situations going on. He's trying to reform the court. And so the Israeli people were actually protesting him when the war happened. He, along with some of his cabinet members, have some criminal issues pending, which is why they want to reform the court, right? So a lot of similarities to Trump, right? So for people that have issues with Netanyahu, I need y'all to also have issues with Trump, because I can draw the parallels all day long. And so I was like, listen, we can't pass an audit when it comes to our defense in the United States. We've not passed in the last 6 audits. So I just want to know, if we are going to send you money, tell us what the mechanisms are where I can say, yes, we're sending money, but let me tell you, it is being safeguarded. We've got a close, watchful eye and that kind of stuff. I didn't quite get my answer. But these are the things that I think about, and these are the hard questions that I always ask. And sometimes people interpret it as me being anti, and it's not me being anti, it's me being a critical thinker. And ultimately I have to weigh the good and the bad and make these hard decisions on some of these very difficult votes.
Yeah, no, and that, thank you again for breaking that down, because this is not one of those questions that just starts and ends with, we need to defend XYZ. There are so many other extenuating circumstances and questions that also have to be answered. So I even though they got a little hot, I'm sure that room got a little testy. I appreciate you posing that question. We have just a minute left, but I'm seeing a number of folks in our show chat have a question for you about Project 2025. It feels like we here on the Lurie Daniel Favor Show here at Urban View, we have been screaming about Project 2025 from the mountaintops, not necessarily seeing that same sort of escalation in urgency when we are looking to members of Congress. Are you all talking about Project 2025? How are you planning to inform your constituents about it? And of course, I'm asking this question with literally like a minute left, but give us some insight into how Project 2025 is factoring into your decisions as a body.
So as far as our decisions as a body, not very much at all. As far as the campaign is concerned, I think as we get closer to November, because there are so many layers to it, and that's when people will really, really start to pay attention, then we absolutely are going to make sure that we're kind of ringing the alarms on that. I do want to say that I did have a hearing where the Heritage Foundation did come before me, and I went in on them.
Sure did.
Yeah, so Heritage Foundation obviously is behind Project 2025, along with they are the ones that have led the way in taking away every fundamental right that we thought we had secured decades ago. So Heritage Foundation, they can kiss my ass. And I need people just to Google them, and anything that they got their name on, we don't want no parts of. So I hope I summarized that quick enough.
That was fantastic. Representative Crockett, we appreciate how you show up. And I think I said this to you the last time, but it is so important for us to not just have representation, physical representation, but to also have people who substantively represent us in a way that say the things that need to be said in the way we know they need to be said. So there's a lot of appreciation for you out there in these Urban View streets and the way that you show up. So thank you for that. What's the best way for people to follow you, support you? I know you in a somewhat safe seat, so you're not sweating bullets for November, but folks still want to know how they can support you and connect with the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. So on the official side, everything is Rep Jasmine, REPJASMINE. And on the campaign side, which is usually where I'm clowning on Twitter, it is Jasmine for Us. And that's on all social media platforms except for TikTok. We do technically have a TikTok account on the unofficial side, but I don't use it.